Hey guys, Justin Parisi here from QA1, and today we're going to be installing a rear coilover kit on this 94 Chevy Caprice wagon. You can either get single or double adjustable shocks. You get your bracketry, you get all the hardware you're going to need. We're going to have various SAE and metric sockets, both standard length and extended. You're going to need extensions. I like to have the wobble socket style. These ones are really nice. We're also going to need just wrenches. A good option to have are some quality impact wrenches. If you're doing this alone, this helps a lot instead of just working with sockets and wrenches. So the first thing that you're going to want to do when you get your kit, and I understand being an enthusiast, you're really excited that you just got your kit and you just want to start taking nuts and bolts apart and throwing on your new kit. But the first thing you really should do is check your tire pressure, make sure all of that is where it's supposed to be. This is my personal wagon, and for me, I wanted all my tires at 30 PSI. I've already checked it, that's where I'm at. Now I'm going to go ahead and measure from the center of the tire at the ground to the top of my skirt and see where I originally am, and then I have a goal to go for when I'm done with the coilover kit. And for me, I want it down to 20 inches. Right now I'm at about 22, so I need to come down roughly 2 inches, and that's the first step. Okay, so now we got the car up on the lift. The car is almost jacked up to the point now where the suspension is almost completely unloaded. So now it's time to unbolt the shock from the lower perch, and then we'll go up top and get the other 2 bolts. So now that we have the lower bolt and the shock undone, now we can raise the car up more and get access to the spring. We're going to get the spring out, and then the spring's out, we have room to get at the upper shock bolts. So now that you have the car up in the air a little bit further, you have room for the shock to come out between the tire and the exhaust on the passenger side. On the driver's side, there's not as much room with the exhaust hanging lower, and you need to actually get the shock out before you can get the spring out. Now that the spring's out, we can gain access to the upper shock bolts. And one thing I wanted to point out with is the youngest these cars are is 21 years old. So there's a good chance that your shocks have been changed. The shocks that I have specifically are a 13 millimeter nut at the bottom and a 10 millimeter bolt at the top. And what I like to use is a 1/4 inch little breaker bar with a 12-point socket to go in from the top. It's tricky to get in there. This is probably the hardest part of the job. But once you can gain access between the axle and the exhaust, you can get your arm up through the top, and there you can gain access with your little breaker bar. With our new 78 to 96 GM brackets, you need to make sure that the slotted hole in the bracket goes towards the front of the car, and that the hole that you need to drill goes towards the outside of the vehicle. That's how you know that you have the correct bracket on the right side of the car. So now that the bracket is loosely in place, we're now going to snug the bracket up and then drill the existing hole with a 5/16 drill bit. And I'm going to be careful not to nick the bracket, but if I do have a paint pen to mend the zinc plating so that we don't cause any more corrosion. Now that the upper bracket is in place, we're going to put the lower in with the one existing hole. We're then going to mark where the upper hole gets drilled using a paint pen and a punch. From there, we're going to put this number 29 drill bit in our drill and drill the pilot hole from the front going back. Once we have our pilot hole done, we'll put in the 1/2 inch drill bit, come from the back going forward, and drill the rest of our hole. Then we can mount up our lower bracket. We're going to go through with a barrel file the holes smooth, and also take a paint pen, and we're going to paint the inside of the holes just for some added corrosion protection. So now that we have the holes drilled in the lower perch, we're going to install the lower bracket with the included hardware. The 3/4 inch long 1/2 inch 20 bolt goes in the lower existing hole in the spring perch. Now we're on to installing the plates onto our modular bracket, and this is what really makes the QA1 rear coilover kit unique, is that these brackets allow you to change the ride height on the back of your car without actually changing where the shock is in its operating range. So what that means is that you can keep your shock in its optimal range while also changing your ride height. Now with these plates, you want both plates on the outside of the tabs of the bracket. And what I mean by that is that the first one goes on the outside on this side, and the second one goes to still the outside of the vehicle on the other tab. And you have 6 positions for these tabs to fit in. You have 3 positions with the brackets this way, and you can flip the brackets and have another 3 positions. So you have 6 positions of ride height, 1.5 inches total in this bracket. It's just one more option for our end customers to truly put their car exactly where they want it. Now that you have your lower plates in place, and I suggest that you put the plates in the lower flipped position and then one up from the very bottom to start out with. And once you have them in position, we are going to get the bolts almost tight, leave the plates just slightly loose, and that'll make it easier to put the shocks in once it's time to do that. Now that the lower bracket is installed and the plates are in loosely, now it's time to install the shock. And if this were a sedan, this would be as simple as taking the 2.5-inch bolt and putting in the upper mount, and then taking the 2 3/4-inch bolt, sliding it through the lower mount, and you'd be done. However, this is a wagon, and the brace on the frame has larger gusseting, and it comes into contact with the edge of the spring, so there is a little bit of trimming that needs to be done before the shock can be installed properly. So the first thing we need to do is put the shock in place and see where the clearance issues are. So now that I temporarily put the shock in place, I'm marked with a paint pen where the spring made interference with the crossmember gusseting. And now I'm going to take the shock back out, and I'm going to use a grinder to clear the spot on the gusset and give the shock and spring more clearance with the wagon crossmember. Now that we trimmed away what we needed to with the crossmember and have roughly 1/2 inch of clearance between the crossmember and the spring, and it's been painted, it's now time to install the shock. We're going to put the 2.5-inch half-20 bolt in the top and a 2 3/4-inch half-20 bolt in the bottom. Let's go. Now these kits come with 4 stainless steel spacers that need to get put in between the plates and the bearing in the shock. You want to make sure that the smaller diameter side goes towards the bearing in your kit. So now that we have both shocks, upper and lower, tight, now it's time to tighten up the plates in the bracket and drop the car down and see where our ride height is and make sure we have it where we want it. Now that we have the suspension all tightened, now it's time to set the ride height. The first thing I'm going to do is shake the rear end just to let the suspension settle out. And I don't have any compression or rebound settings in the knobs yet, so it'll bounce quite a bit and settle. Once we bounce the rear end a little bit, the car will be settled enough to where we can take our ride height measurements. We're back at our original ride height of 22 inches from the ground to the top of the skirt. Now it's time to adjust the shocks and the brackets. The best way to do it is to adjust with the brackets first, and then adjust the shock, and try to get your shock from eyelet to eyelet to 16 inches plus or minus 3/4 of an inch. That's the best ride height, optimal range for a 6-inch stroke, single or double adjustable shock. Now that we got the ride height set on our 95 Caprice wagon and it's nice and level, it's time to go enjoy it. And if you have any questions, please visit our website or give us a call on our tech line.